Zora Simmons stood behind the counter, polishing a chipped ceramic mug, the same way she had done every morning for the past 3 years. She looked calm, even graceful in her simple uniform, but inside, the weight of unpaid bills, her grandmother's growing medical expenses, and the quiet loneliness of her life pressed heavily on her chest. Zora was known in town as the sweet one, always smiling, always polite, but few knew how much strength it took to keep that smile in place. Her world was small, the creaky floors of the diner, the familiar ring of the doorbell above the entrance, and the regulars who gathered for gossip and grits. Yet every now and then, when the laughter of couples or families echoed through the diner, Zora felt like a stranger watching life happen to everyone but herself. Ruby Patterson, the owner, leaned through the kitchen window and hollered, "Zora, Table 5's been waiting on their biscuits and gravy." "Yes, Mom," Zora replied, forcing a brightness into her voice as she wiped her hands on her apron and grabbed the plate. She weaved through the few early morning customers and delivered the food with practiced charm. Across the room, Janice Parker, the self-proclaimed queen of the diner, watched with thinly veiled disdain. Janice, older than Zora, but with ambitions twice as desperate, loved nothing more than reminding Zora of her place. "You're too soft, sugar," Janice whispered as Zora passed by. "One day, you'll realize kindness doesn't pay." Zora didn't reply. She just smiled faintly and went back to the counter. Deep down, she sometimes wondered if Janice was right. What had kindness earned her? A second-hand car on its last leg, nights spent rationing medicine for her grandmother, and a future that seemed as faded as the floral wallpaper in the diner. The bell above the door jingled. Zora's attention snapped up. An elderly man, his clothes worn and his gait slow, stepped inside. His hair was silver and unruly, and his brown leather jacket had clearly seen better days. The way he looked around the diner, with both caution and longing, made him seem out of place among the regulars who hardly noticed him. Janice raised an eyebrow. "Lost, Grandpa," she muttered under her breath. Zora's heart tightened. She recognized that look, the one he wore. It was the same one she saw in the mirror on the days she felt invisible. "Welcome to Magnolia Diner," Zora said, stepping out from behind the counter. "Take any seat you like, sir." The old man gave her a gentle nod and shuffled to the corner booth by the window. He sat with quiet dignity, ignoring the whispers from a couple of locals sitting nearby. Zora approached him, pad and pencil ready. "What can I get you this morning?" "Just a cup of coffee," he said softly. His voice was steady, but there was something in it. Weariness or maybe sorrow. "That's on the house," Zora replied without hesitation. He blinked. "You sure?" "Yes, sir. It's a beautiful morning, and I reckon everyone deserves at least one warm cup." A flicker of surprise crossed his face before it softened into a grateful smile. "You remind me of someone I used to know," he said, almost to himself. Zora poured the coffee and slid it gently across the table. As she stepped back, Janice stood nearby, arms crossed. "Don't waste your time," Janice whispered. "He probably won't tip a dime." Zora didn't flinch, but her grip on the coffee pot tightened ever so slightly. She had heard it all before. Yet, watching the old man warm his hands around the mug, eyes fixed on the steam as if it were a long-lost friend, Zora knew her choice was right. Minutes passed. The quiet rhythm of the diner continued, but Zora couldn't help but glance at him occasionally. He sat there, quietly savoring the simple kindness he'd been shown. No rush, no complaints. Pearl Benson, a regular at the diner, caught Zora's eye from across the room. With a knowing nod, Pearl whispered, "Don't you listen to them. Your daddy would be proud of you." Zora swallowed hard and offered Pearl a soft smile. Those words always cut deeper than she let on. Her father had been the kindest man she'd ever known before. A heart attack took him too soon, leaving Zora with his legacy of gentle strength. and a house filled with memories too painful to visit. As Zora turned back to her duties, the bell above the door rang again, this time revealing a sharply dressed man in a tailored grey suit. His polished shoes clicked softly on the worn diner floor. His sharp blue eyes scanned the room like a hawk surveying a field. Samuel Walker. The name meant little to most people in the diner, but in Charleston it was whispered in every real estate deal and charity gala. He was the head of Walker Development Group, the richest man within 50 miles, and the kind of businessman who seemed untouchable. Janice straightened her apron and Ruby emerged from the kitchen, wiping flour from her hands. The room shifted. Everyone noticed Samuel, but Samuel's attention wasn't on them. His eyes locked on the old man, quietly sipping coffee by the window. Without acknowledging anyone else, Samuel stepped to the counter. "Who served him?" he asked, his voice low but firm. Zora, caught off guard, said softly, "I did." "Why?" Samuel didn't answer. He gave her a long, unreadable look before sitting at a nearby table, opening his leather-bound notebook as if the conversation had never happened. Zora stood frozen for a moment, feeling the weight of his gaze still lingering. Something wasn't right. Why would a man like Samuel Walker, who had no business in a roadside diner, care about an old man sipping black coffee? The tension simmered beneath the surface like a storm gathering on the horizon. Pearl leaned towards Zora and whispered, "Child, you best hold on to that kindness of yours. You never know who's watching." Zora exhaled slowly, stealing another glance at Samuel. Whatever was about to unfold, she could feel it. This was just the beginning. And deep down, the quiet girl who had endured so much couldn't help but wonder if life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The clock on the wall ticked softly, marking the moment where everything began to shift. The story had already started. Zora balanced a tray of freshly brewed coffee and pecan pie slices as she glanced once more at the corner booth. William sat quietly, watching the world pass through the large diner window as if he didn't belong to it. His frail hands cradled the chipped mug Zora had given him earlier, holding it like it was the warmest thing he'd felt in years. Across the diner, Samuel Walker remained at his table, pen tapping rhythmically against his notebook. His sharp eyes never strayed far from William or Zora. Ruby slid out of the kitchen and nudged Zora lightly with her elbow. "Careful, hun. That's Samuel Walker," she whispered, tilting her head discreetly toward him. "He doesn't make casual visits." Zora forced a half smile. "Maybe he's just hungry," she said, trying to hide the unease creeping up her spine. But even she knew that men like Samuel didn't stop by diners like Magnolia without a reason. Janice was already circling like a hawk, swiping a fresh pot of coffee off the warmer and strutting towards Samuel's table. "Mr. Walker," she purred, smoothing her apron. "Such a surprise to see you here." Samuel raised his gaze for the briefest second. "I'm fine, thank you." His tone was distant, clipped. Zora carried on with her tables, but the air in the diner had shifted. Customers leaned in, quietly speculating, eyes darting between the old man in the corner and the businessman studying him like a puzzle. Pearl Benson caught Zora's eye and gave a subtle nod, as if confirming what Zora already felt. Something was happening beneath the surface. Later that afternoon, when the diner quieted to the usual lull between lunch and dinner, Zora found herself refilling William's coffee. He gave her a grateful smile, eyes tired but kind. "You're good to people," William said softly, "even when they aren't good to you." Zora's heart gave a small tug. "I just believe everyone deserves kindness, even if they don't give it back." William nodded, a glint of emotion flickering in his eyes. Not everyone sees it that way, especially folks with more than they need. His gaze flicked, almost imperceptibly, towards Samuel before returning to his coffee. Zora hesitated. "Do you know him?" William smiled faintly. "We've crossed paths." Before Zora could press further, Ruby called from behind the counter. Zora, darling, we got a call. The delivery truck stalled on Highway 17. Go help Joe with the restock before we run dry. Zora wiped her hands and grabbed her coat. As she stepped out into the cold air, she couldn't shake the strange tension hanging between William and Samuel. Why would a powerful man like Samuel Walker be watching an old man who barely had enough for coffee? By the time she returned, the diner was nearly empty except for Samuel, William, and a few stragglers nursing late lunches. She noticed Janice standing too close to Samuel's table, batting her lashes like a teenager. If you ever need someone familiar with local business, Janice was saying, I'd be more than happy to show you around Charleston. Samuel's pen stopped mid-scribble. His tone stayed polite, but firm. I'm sure you would. Zora bit the inside of her cheek, pretending not to notice. She walked past them, but not before Samuel's eyes flicked up to meet hers. For a split second, Zora saw something she hadn't expected. Not the detached business-like gaze he wore all morning, but something softer, curious, searching. Their eyes held, just long enough for Zora's breath to catch, before she quickly returned to the counter. Janice noticed the exchange and immediately puffed up with irritation. Careful, sugar, she hissed as she passed by Zora. That's not your crowd. That kind of man don't go for girls like us. Zora gripped the counter edge but stayed silent. Deep down, those words hurt more than she wanted to admit. Later, as Zora cleared the empty dishes from William's table, he reached out gently and touched her hand. You have a rare gift, child, he said with sincerity. Don't let anyone make you doubt it. Zora blinked back sudden tears and nodded. Thank you, sir. The doorbell jingled softly as William left, pausing briefly to tip his hat towards Samuel before shuffling into the fading afternoon light. Samuel remained seated, watching William with an unreadable expression. Ruby whispered to Zora behind the counter. Something tells me they ain't strangers. Zora's stomach twisted. I was thinking the same. Pearl, still nursing her tea, leaned forward. Child, you watch yourself. Kind hearts like yours attract more than just good people. The words sat heavy on Zora's chest as she looked out the window, watching William disappear down the sidewalk. The unanswered question lingered. Who was William to Samuel Walker? And why did it feel like Zora had just stepped into something far bigger than a slow afternoon at the Magnolia? That night, as Zora locked up and turned out the diner lights, she stood alone beneath the soft glow of the street lamps. The wind stirred the magnolia petals scattered on the sidewalk, and for the first time in a long while, Zora felt the quiet whisper of change. What she didn't know was that the storm was just beginning. The next morning arrived colder than usual, with the mist rolling off the nearby Ashley River and settling gently on the streets of Charleston. Inside Magnolia Diner, Zora flipped the chairs down from the tables, preparing for another slow winter day. The aroma of fresh pecan pie filled the air, but the sweetness did little to calm the unease brewing inside her. As she brewed the first pot of coffee, Ruby came in, rubbing her arms. You hear about that big Walker development project downtown? Folks are saying they'll buy up half the historic district, Ruby said, half amused, half worried. Those Walkers don't play small. Zora nodded faintly, not mentioning Samuel's sudden appearance yesterday, or the strange way he'd watched William. It had been on her mind all night, churning quietly as she lay awake in her tiny room above her grandmother's home. The doorbell jingled, breaking her thoughts. Samuel Walker stepped inside. His presence filled the room instantly. He wasn't dressed as sharply as the day before. Today, it was a crisp white shirt and dark slacks, but the air around him was no less commanding. Zora stiffened as she wiped her hands on her apron, watching him scan the empty diner before settling his gaze on her. Morning, Samuel said simply, walking directly to the counter. Zora's voice caught. Morning. Coffee. He nodded. Please. As she poured the coffee, The silence between them felt heavy, charged. He watched her carefully, as if studying her more than the diner itself. His sharp features softened just slightly when their eyes met, but Zora quickly turned her attention back to the coffee pot. "You served the gentleman yesterday," Samuel said, breaking the silence. Zora's hand paused mid-pour. "William?" she asked, unsure why her throat tightened. Samuel's eyes narrowed slightly, almost as if he was surprised to hear his name. "Yes." William. Zora hesitated before sliding the cup toward him. "He's been in a few times," she said carefully. "Sweet man." Samuel took a slow sip of the coffee, eyes never leaving her. "You helped him when others didn't." Zora's brow knit slightly. "I don't see why anyone wouldn't." Samuel's lip twitched, not quite a smile, but something close. "Most wouldn't bother." The door jingled again, and Janice breezed in, eyes instantly locking onto Samuel. Her presence changed the atmosphere as quickly as a cold draft sneaking under the door. "Well, look who's back," Janice said sweetly, making her way behind the counter. "Couldn't resist our little slice of heaven." Samuel glanced at her but didn't engage. His attention lingered on Zora instead. Janice noticed, her eyes flicked between the two of them, and her smile faltered. Ruby, watching from the kitchen pass-through, quietly wiped her hands and leaned closer to Pearl, who had taken her usual seat by the window. "You feel that too?" Ruby whispered. Pearl nodded, like a storm brewing. Janice, determined not to be ignored, leaned over the counter. "Mr. Walker, I just adore your work around the city. Those new condos off Meeting Street, stunning." Samuel offered a polite nod, but shifted his focus back to Zora. "Do you always go out of your way for customers, Miss Simmons?" The question made Zora's cheeks warm. She wasn't used to being the focus of attention, especially not from men like Samuel Walker. "It's just how I was raised," she answered softly. "You treat folks right, no matter who they are." Samuel leaned back, as if weighing her words. "Your father teach you that?" Zora's throat tightened. "He did." A brief silence fell over them. Janice stepped in quickly. "Oh, Zora's just a soft-hearted girl. Wouldn't hurt a fly. Bless her," she said with a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. Zora could feel the sting behind the words, but she kept her expression steady. Samuel's gaze lingered on her a moment longer, unreadable. Then he stood. "I'll be in town for a while," he said, straightening his sleeves. "Might stop by again." He left without another word, leaving a quiet tension in the room. As the door shut softly behind him, Janice turned sharply towards Zora. "Now, what's that about?" she said, barely masking her irritation. "Did you say something to him yesterday?" Zora shook her head. "I just served him coffee." Ruby leaned against the counter. "And maybe you treated him like a person instead of a ticket to the top." Janice huffed and turned away, wiping down the counter more forcefully than necessary. Pearl sipped her tea, watching Zora thoughtfully. "You be careful, child," she said softly. "Not every gaze from a man like that is just business." Zora forced a small smile but said nothing. She could still feel Samuel's eyes watching her, even after he was gone. Later that evening, as Zora swept the floors, Betty Ann popped her head in, cheeks flushed from the cold. "Zora, you'll never believe what I heard at the market," she said, pulling off her knit hat. "Samuel Walker's been asking around town about you." Zora's heart dropped. "Me? Why?" "No idea, but he's making inquiries," Betty Ann said, lowering her voice. "Word is he's a hard man, Zora. Always keeps things about business. Folks don't know much about him other than he's powerful and alone." Zora swallowed hard. Alone. That word sounded too familiar. As Zora locked up the diner that night, the wind pressed against the windows, rattling them softly. She stood by the door for a moment, staring into the foggy streets, clutching her coat tightly around her. Something was shifting. She could feel it. The question was it something good or something she should run from? And far down the sidewalk, under the soft orange glow of the street lamps, a figure stood quietly watching the diner. William. His eyes were gentle but knowing, as if he could already see the storm coming for Zora's heart. The following morning, frost clung to the windows of Magnolia Diner, blurring the view of the sleepy Charleston streets. Zora worked quietly, wiping the same counter she had cleaned 1,000 times, but today it felt different. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried not to show it. Samuel Walker's presence lingered like perfume after a guest had left. Faint, but undeniable. As Zora straightened the salt and pepper shakers on the tables, the door creaked open. Pearl was already sitting at her usual window seat sipping tea. She peered over her glasses. "Child, you're wearing worry like it's Sunday's best." Zora tried to laugh, but the sound came out weak. "Guess I'm just tired." Pearl raised a brow, but said nothing more. At mid-morning, Samuel returned, just like he said he might. The usual clatter and chatter of the diner dulled into hushed whispers as soon as he stepped through the door. Zora's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to move calmly behind the counter. He wore a charcoal coat today, elegant yet understated, fitting for someone who could probably buy the whole block without blinking. He took the same seat, this time at the counter, directly across from her. "Miss Simmons," he greeted smoothly, "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Zora fumbled briefly with the coffee pot. "You're not. Just didn't expect to see you again so soon." "I like the quiet here." Samuel glanced around the nearly empty diner. "And the coffee's decent." Pearl, sipping her tea, chuckled quietly to herself. Ruby peeked from the kitchen, watching intently. Zora tried to stay composed, but Samuel's presence pulled at her nerves. "Same as yesterday?" she asked, already pouring him a cup. Samuel nodded. "Please, and maybe a slice of whatever pie you recommend." Zora blinked. It was such a simple request, but something about the way he said it felt intimate, like he wasn't just ordering food, like he wanted something more, a connection. "I'll bring you the pecan pie," she said softly. As she served him, Zora noticed how Samuel watched her carefully, as if searching for something behind her polite smile. "You've lived here long?" Samuel asked, voice low, almost hesitant. Zora set the plate down. "All my life." "Family?" "My grandmother and I." Zora's voice softened at the mention. "I lost my parents years ago." Samuel's brows knit slightly. "I'm sorry." Zora offered a small shrug, forcing her composure. "It's just life." He studied her a little longer, then said, "Life's not always fair." Zora's chest tightened. For a fleeting second, she wanted to ask him how he knew about unfairness, sitting there in $1,000 coat. But the flicker of sorrow in his eyes told her this was not a man untouched by hardship. Before she could reply, Janice burst through the kitchen door, carrying a fresh plate. "Oh, Mr. Walker," she said with exaggerated sweetness, "I made this just for you." She placed it in front of him, a slice of chocolate silk pie topped with a swirl of whipped cream. Samuel's eyes didn't leave Zora. "Thank you," he said absently, pushing the plate aside. Janice's face stiffened for a second before she forced another smile. "If there's anything you need, just holler." She lingered for a moment, hoping to reclaim his attention, but Samuel was already reaching for his fork, focused on Zora's pecan pie. As Janice retreated, Pearl shook her head subtly. "Lord, have mercy," she mumbled under her breath. Samuel took a bite, then nodded in approval. "Best I've had." "Thank you," Zora replied, flustered, unsure if he meant the pie or something else. The silence stretched between them, comfortable but heavy. Samuel leaned forward, voice dropping. "I hope you don't mind me saying." but you seem out of place here. Zora's heart skipped. I don't know what you mean. You serve people with more heart than most people I've done business with. Doesn't seem like many notice. He took another bite, eyes still on her. Zora swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. Part of her wanted to take it as a compliment, but another part wondered if he was just like the others, pitying her. I'm where I need to be, she said firmly, though it came out quieter than she intended. Samuel leaned back, considering her words. Maybe, he said, half smiling. Before Zora could reply, the door creaked open again. William entered, slower today, his steps more hesitant. Samuel's eyes flicked toward him sharply. William's gaze swept the room, softening when he spotted Zora. He made his way to his usual booth. Zora immediately excused herself from Samuel and brought a cup of coffee to William. Morning, sir, she greeted warmly. Morning, child, William said, eyes twinkling. Cold one today. It surely is. Zora smiled, but her mind spun. The energy between Samuel and William was undeniable, a flicker of recognition Samuel tried to hide, but couldn't. Zora felt it as surely as she felt the chill in the air. Samuel finished his pie, stood, and laid a crisp bill on the counter. I'll be seeing you again, Miss Simmons. Zora forced a nod as he tipped his head slightly and left. William watched him go, then turned to Zora. You be careful, dear. The words hung heavy. Zora stared out the frosted window, watching Samuel's car disappear down the street. The mystery deepened, wrapping around her heart like the Charleston fog. As she stood there, Pearl's voice broke through gently. Sometimes, child, the richest folks are the ones carrying the heaviest burdens. Zora blinked, the meaning of those words sinking deep. Something told her that this wasn't just another customer passing through. This was the beginning of something much bigger than she could yet understand. The following day, Magnolia Diner hummed softly under the weight of drizzle tapping against his windows. The streets of Charleston were cloaked in mist, blurring the edges of the familiar world outside. Inside, the diner smelled of cinnamon rolls and fresh cornbread, but Zora could hardly taste or smell anything. Her thoughts spun relentlessly around Samuel and William. Something about their quiet glances, their distance, felt unfinished. Zora was wiping down the front counter when Ruby approached, arms crossed. You've been staring out that window like you expect the ocean to roll right down Meeting Street, she said, voice gentle but firm. Zora gave a tight-lipped smile. Just thinking. Ruby leaned on the counter, lowering her voice. About him. Zora didn't answer, but the flicker of guilt in her eyes was enough. The door chime interrupted them. Samuel Walker, punctual as ever, stepped inside. He wasn't alone. A refined woman in an immaculate deep green coat trailed behind him. Her silver hair was pinned in a perfect French twist, and her sharp gaze swept the diner like she was already looking for faults. Zora recognized the kind instantly. Old Charleston money, untouchable, regal, unforgiving. Ruby whispered, "That's Penelope Walker." His mother. Zora's throat tightened. Samuel's eyes found Zora almost immediately. "Good morning," he said, casual but precise. "Miss Simmons, I'd like to introduce my mother, Penelope Walker." Zora stepped out from behind the counter, wiping her hands nervously on her apron. "Welcome to Magnolia Diner, Mrs. Walker," she said, trying to steady her voice. Penelope's sharp eyes took Zora in from head to toe, lingering on the worn apron, the simple shoes, the small coffee stain near the hem of her skirt. Then, she gave a short nod, her lips pressed thin. "Charmed," she said, though it sounded anything but. Samuel, unfazed, gestured toward a booth. "We'll take that one." As they settled in, Zora returned to the counter, pulse racing. Pearl, sitting in her usual corner, gave Zora a knowing glance. "You're in deep now, child." Ruby frowned. That woman could cut glass with that look. Zora forced a smile, but her fingers trembled as she gripped the coffee pot. Taking a deep breath, she approached their table. "Coffee?" she offered, trying to keep it light. Penelope's eyes flicked up. "We'll have 2 teas, she corrected with a slight edge. "Earl Grey if you have it." Zora nodded and retreated to the kitchen. Samuel watched Zora's retreat with quiet interest. Penelope leaned in. "Is this the girl you mentioned?" she asked. Samuel didn't answer right away. His gaze lingered on Zora's careful movements behind the counter. "Yes," he said simply. Penelope's lips pressed tighter. "She seems quaint." Zora returned moments later, setting the tea carefully before them. "I'll give you a moment," she said softly, retreating quickly. Back at the counter, Ruby's arms were folded tight. "She's sizing you up," she warned, and not in a neighborly way. "I know," Zora whispered, stealing a glance at Penelope, who now sat stiffly, sipping her tea with careful precision. Samuel remained mostly silent, watching Zora whenever Penelope wasn't. His gaze wasn't cold or detached today. It was softer, curious, almost protective. After they finished their tea, Samuel stood and approached the counter while Penelope waited by the door. He spoke low, just for Zora. "My mother's particular," he said with a hint of apology. "Don't take it personally." Zora forced a small smile. "I'm used to particular." Samuel's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Good." He slipped a card across the counter. Zora stared at it, cream-colored, embossed with his initials. No phone number, just an address. "I'd like you to come by," Samuel said. "Tomorrow afternoon if you can." Zora blinked. "To where?" "My office," he replied. "Or home, depending how you look at it. It's the family estate." He paused, then added, "You've caught my attention, Miss Simmons. I'd like to talk." Before Zora could respond, Penelope's heels clicked impatiently near the door. Samuel tipped his head. No pressure. And then he left. Zora stood frozen, staring at the card. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like it echoed against the walls. Janice, who had just arrived for her shift, noticed the card. "What's that?" she asked, already leaning over the counter. Zora quickly tucked it away. "Nothing." But Janice wasn't fooled. She narrowed her eyes, following Zora with suspicion as she moved toward the kitchen. Pearl finished her tea and quietly approached Zora. "You've stepped into something, honey," she said softly. "And I don't think it's just about pie and coffee anymore." That night, Zora sat alone in her grandmother's small living room. The rain tapped gently against the windows. The card Samuel had given her lay on the table in front of her. She stared at it for what felt like hours. Her grandmother, dozing softly in her recliner, stirred just enough to murmur, "You all right, baby?" Zora's throat tightened. I don't know." Because deep down, Zora wasn't just wondering if she should go. She was wondering if, somehow, Samuel Walker wasn't just a customer with sharp eyes and soft words. He might just be the man who could change everything. And outside, beyond the window, through the shimmering rain, William stood across the street beneath the shadow of a live oak, watching quietly, as if protecting her from a distance. The next afternoon, Zora stood frozen at the wrought iron gates of the Walker estate. Towering oaks lined the gravel driveway, their sprawling branches heavy with Spanish moss, swaying gently in the late winter breeze. Beyond them, the grand house stood like something from an old Charleston postcard, white-columned, proud, untouched by time. Clutching Samuel's card tightly, Zora hesitated. She could still turn back. No one would know. But deep inside, something stronger than fear urged her forward. Slowly she pushed through the gates and followed the path. The crunch of gravel under her shoes echoed louder than she expected, almost warning her that she was stepping into a world far beyond anything Magnolia Diner had prepared her for. At the front door, Thomas, Samuel's assistant, stood waiting. His tailored suit and calm demeanor matched the estate perfectly. "Miss Simmons," he greeted, tipping his head respectfully. "Mr. Walker is expecting you." Zora gave a small nod, her voice catching. "Thank you." Thomas guided her through the entryway, where the air smelled faintly of aged wood and fresh lilies. The walls were lined with oil paintings and old family portraits, their eyes following Zora as if silently judging her. They arrived at a sunlit sitting room overlooking a garden, where Samuel stood near the window, hands in his pockets. His posture was relaxed, but there was something guarded about his expression. "Miss Simmons," he said, turning toward her, "I'm glad you came." Zora clasped her hands nervously. I wasn't sure if I should." "I wasn't sure if you would," Samuel replied without missing a beat. "Please, have a seat." She sat delicately on the edge of a cream-colored settee, feeling out of place, like a single wildflower in a room full of curated roses. Samuel remained standing, watching her closely. "I didn't bring you here to talk about coffee or pie." Zora's stomach twisted. "I brought you here," Samuel continued, "because you're the only person in a long time who's shown kindness to someone, when you had nothing to gain from it." He crossed his arms. "To William." At the mention of the old man's name, Zora straightened. "Is he all right?" Samuel's eyes softened. "He's stubborn. Always has been." He glanced toward the garden. "He's also my father." The word struck like a sudden wind. Zora blinked. "Your father?" Samuel nodded. "He prefers not to talk about it. He left the family years ago. He didn't want to be part of the expectations." Zora's thoughts raced. The tender, humble William, the same man who ordered black coffee and smiled when she gave him an extra slice of pie. Samuel's father. Samuel watched her carefully. "That's why I was watching you at the diner. I wasn't just curious, I was protective." Zora swallowed hard. "I didn't know." "I know you didn't." His voice softened. "That's what made it genuine." Silence filled the room, heavy but not uncomfortable. Zora's mind swirled. William had never mentioned being connected to the powerful Walker name, yet something about him always carried quiet dignity, one she now understood. Before Zora could respond, the sound of heels clicked sharply against the polished floor. Penelope appeared in the doorway, elegant as ever. Her cool gaze drifted between Samuel and Zora. "Samuel," Penelope said, with polite firmness, "may I have a word?" Samuel's jaw tensed slightly. "Later, mother." Penelope's brows lifted. She shifted her focus to Zora, a poised smile curving her lips. "Miss Simmons, I trust the estate is not too overwhelming for you." Zora stood instinctively. "It's beautiful, Mrs. Walker." Penelope's smile remained frozen. "As it should be. The Walker name carries with it certain standards." Samuel's voice sharpened. "Mother," but Penelope continued, "I do hope you understand how different our worlds are, dear." She turned to Samuel with a knowing glance. "I'll leave you to it." Zora's chest tightened. The room felt colder the moment Penelope left. Zora forced a breath and tried to steady herself. Samuel walked toward her. "I'm sorry about that." "She's protective," Zora said gently, though her heart ached at how small she felt. "She's complicated." Samuel's voice carried the weariness of someone who'd been explaining his mother's ways for years. Zora forced a brave smile. "You don't need to apologize. I'm used to not fitting in." Samuel's eyes lingered on her. "That's exactly what worries me." Zora's breath caught. Samuel hesitated for a moment, then added quietly, "I've seen what this world does to kind people." His eyes softened. "And I don't want you to lose that." Zora's heart thudded painfully. His words weren't just polite, they were personal. She gathered herself quickly. Mr. Walker. Samuel, he interrupted gently. Call me Samuel. The way he said it wasn't demanding. It was almost vulnerable. Zora nodded. Samuel, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not looking for anything. I only helped William because it was the right thing to do. A genuine smile finally broke across Samuel's face. Not a smirk. Not the polite mask he wore at the diner. A real, warm smile. That's what I hoped you'd say, he whispered. As Zora stood to leave, Samuel stepped closer, just enough for her to notice the quiet sincerity behind his usual calm. I'd like you to consider coming to work for me. Zora blinked. Work for you? As my father's companion, Samuel said. He needs someone who sees him, not just his last name, someone he already trusts. The offer left Zora speechless. Samuel added softly, think about it. I'll understand if you say no. Zora nodded slowly, her heart pounding. I'll think about it. Samuel's eyes didn't waver. Good. As Zora left the estate, walking beneath the sweeping oaks back toward the quiet city streets, the crisp winter wind couldn't cool the warmth or the confusion rising inside her. And in the distance, standing half hidden by the garden wall, William watched silently, his weathered hands tucked into the pockets of his old jacket. His eyes shimmered with something between hope and sadness. Zora had no idea how closely she was now entangled in their world. The following morning, the soft glow of dawn settled over Charleston, bathing the city in quiet gold. Zora stood at the back door of Magnolia Diner, watching the mist roll in from the harbor, the card Samuel had given her tucked tightly in her apron pocket. She hadn't slept much. The offer clung to her thoughts like the fog clung to the streets. Inside, Ruby was already rolling dough, humming softly to herself, while Betty Ann refilled sugar canisters. The usual rhythm of the diner seemed to carry on, unchanged, but Zora felt the shift deep in her bones. Still thinking about it, Betty Ann asked, catching Zora lingering in the doorway. Zora gave a small nod. It's a lot. Betty Ann wiped her hands on a towel. Sugar, folks like us don't get offers like that every day. But don't you say yes just 'cause it feels like a way out. Say yes if it feels like a way forward. Zora bit her bottom lip. That's the thing. I don't know what it feels like yet. Before Betty Ann could respond, the front doorbell jingled. Zora peered out and froze. Samuel, once again immaculately dressed, stood just inside the door, brushing raindrops from his coat. This time, he wasn't alone. William, wearing the same humble jacket and carrying an old leather satchel, stood beside him. He looked tired, but smiled when his eyes met Zora's. The sight of them together made Zora's stomach tighten unexpectedly. Samuel stepped forward, calm and composed. Morning, Miss Simmons. Zora smoothed her apron and nodded, masking the flutter beneath her ribs. Good morning. William tipped his hat. Hope you don't mind us dropping by. Of course not, Zora replied, glancing between them. The scene felt unreal. The son who commanded Charleston and the father who slipped through life like a quiet shadow standing side by side. Samuel gestured to an empty booth. May we? Zora motioned to the seat. Please. As they settled in, Janice, lurking by the register, leaned closer to Ruby. What's she got herself into now? Ruby hushed her with a sharp look. Mind your work, Janice. Zora approached with coffee, her hand steady even as her heart wasn't. Samuel noticed. Thank you, he said, voice lower, almost personal. William smiled warmly at her. You look like you've seen a ghost, child. Zora tried to laugh. It's just, unexpected. William's eyes softened. I know. Samuel leaned forward. I wanted my father to be the one to ask you himself. Zora blinked. Ask me? William cleared his throat. I could use some help. Company, mostly. I'm not getting younger, and frankly, I'd rather spend my time with someone who treats me like a person instead of a burden. Samuel watched Zora closely. This isn't about work at the diner. This is about us, my family. Zora's chest tightened. Mr. Walker, I'm not sure I'm qualified. You are, William interrupted gently. You already proved that the moment you slid me a cup of coffee without flinching at my jacket. Zora searched their faces, heart pounding. What would you need me to do? Spend time with him, Samuel said simply. Accompany him to appointments, help him manage his errands, keep him company when I'm away. His gaze softened. Be yourself. Zora's throat tightened. The thought of leaving the only job she knew, even temporarily, terrified her. Yet there was something honest, even vulnerable, in Samuel's eyes, and something quietly hopeful in William's. Could I think about it? Zora asked softly. Samuel gave a small nod. Of course. But William chuckled. You've already decided, haven't you? Zora's cheeks flushed. Maybe. As the two men finished their coffee and rose to leave, Samuel paused near the counter. If you say yes, meet me at the estate tomorrow, noon. Zora nodded, eyes tracing the floor. Samuel added, lower this time. Don't let fear answer for you. As the door shut softly behind them, the diner buzzed with whispers. Janice watched with thinly veiled jealousy. Ruby gave Zora a subtle, reassuring nod. Pearl, stirring cream into her tea, called gently across the room. Sometimes, child, a good heart brings you to the places you're meant to be. Zora tried to steady herself, but her pulse raced. There was something happening beyond the simple offer. Something deeper. That evening, Zora stood by the marsh, watching the orange-pink sunset melt into the horizon. The card in her pocket felt heavier than it should. Behind her, William appeared quietly, as if carried by the breeze. He stood beside her without saying a word. I'm scared, Zora finally admitted, tears stinging the corner of her eyes. What if I'm not meant for any of this? William didn't answer immediately. He simply watched the marsh birds lift and scatter across the glowing sky. You helped an old man who had nothing, he said softly. That tells me you've already got more than you think. Zora turned to him. Why me? William's weathered hand reached out gently, resting on her shoulder. Because you see people, child, not just what they can give you. And that's rare. The wind stirred again, carrying with it the scent of salt and river grass. The city's lights twinkled faintly beyond the marsh. And in that quiet moment, Zora realized this wasn't just a job. It was a crossroad. The iron gates of the Walker estate creaked open as Zora approached, heart pounding beneath her simple wool coat. Noon sunlight filtered through the moss-laden oaks, painting the gravel driveway in delicate patterns. She had stood at this very spot just yesterday, unsure if she would ever return. But here she was, drawn not by the promise of money or prestige, but by something deeper. William's eyes, Samuel's quiet sincerity, and a whisper of hope she couldn't name. Thomas was waiting, as poised as ever. Miss Simmons, he greeted with a warm nod. Right on time. Zora managed a small smile. I almost turned back. Thomas's lips curved gently. Most who belong here feel that way at first. He led her inside, and immediately the house felt different. The towering walls didn't seem quite as intimidating, though the sheer elegance of the grand staircase and marble floors still caught her breath. This time, William was waiting for her, seated in the sunlit conservatory, dressed in a neat cardigan and holding a well-worn book on his lap. He looked up and grinned softly. You came. Zora stepped inside. I did. William's eyes crinkled with warmth. Good. As Zora sat across from him, she felt the comfort of his presence. Yet hovering in the corner of the room, like a shadow, was Samuel. His arms crossed, leaning against the doorway, studying the scene like a man unsure if he had just made the right choice. Zora turned to him. I'm here because I want to be, not because I feel like I owe you. Samuel's brows lifted slightly, but then he gave a nod of approval. That's exactly why I asked you. William chuckled under his breath. She's got more backbone than you thought, son. The quiet tension was interrupted when Penelope Walker appeared at the threshold, her entrance as commanding as a change in the weather. She was dressed impeccably, every pearl and button in place, holding a silver tea tray as if it were a crown. Miss Simmons, she said calmly, I trust you've settled in? Zora stood instinctively. I'm just getting acquainted. Penelope's eyes didn't flinch. I imagine this is all rather overwhelming. She crossed the room gracefully and set the tray down. The house, the family, the responsibilities. Zora held her composure. Yes, ma'am, but I'm willing to learn. Penelope offered a thin, practiced smile. I hope you do. We are a family of tradition here, Miss Simmons. William let out a low sigh, earning a sharp glance from his wife. Samuel remained silent, eyes on Zora, observing how she would respond. Zora straightened her shoulders. I'm not here to disrupt your traditions, Mrs. Walker. I'm here for William. For a brief second, Penelope blinked, surprised perhaps, at the firmness in Zora's voice. She didn't reply but simply poured tea with deliberate grace. As the afternoon unfolded, Zora spent hours beside William, reading to him, sharing stories about the diner, and listening to his own tales from when he was a young man building houses with his own two hands. His laughter, gentle and genuine, filled the conservatory. Samuel remained nearby, quietly working at the edge of the room, though Zora often caught him stealing glances when he thought she wasn't looking. There was something different in his expression now, less guarded, more thoughtful. Later, as the sun dipped low and cast amber light across the polished floors, William quietly excused himself for an afternoon rest. Zora wandered toward the garden doors, needing a breath of fresh air. Samuel followed. Outside, beneath the swaying oaks, they stood together in the chilly breeze. The estate grounds were silent except for the rustling of leaves. You handled my mother well, Samuel said quietly. Zora crossed her arms to guard against the cold. I wasn't trying to. That's what she's not used to. They stood in silence for a beat, the wind weaving between them. Why do you trust me? Zora finally asked. You barely know me. Samuel turned toward her, the fading sunlight catching the edges of his sharp features. Because I've seen the way you look at people. Like they matter. Not just William. Everyone. He hesitated. That's not common around here. Zora's chest tightened at the honesty in his voice. He stepped a little closer, his voice softer. And because my father trusts you, I've learned not to question his instincts. Zora looked away, uncertain how to respond. There was no denying the gentle pull between them, but it terrified her more than she cared to admit. Before she could gather her words, Penelope appeared on the veranda, arms crossed. Samuel, dear, a word. Samuel's expression shifted instantly, retreating into that familiar controlled exterior. Excuse me, he said to Zora, before disappearing into the house with his mother. Left alone, Zora stared out across the sprawling garden. Somewhere between the lingering scent of jasmine and the distant sound of the city, she realized that Samuel wasn't just a cold businessman. Beneath the layers, there was a man wrestling with duty, family, and maybe even something as fragile as hope. Pearl's words echoed quietly in her mind. Sometimes, child, a good heart brings you to the places you're meant to be. Zora wasn't sure yet if this was where she was meant to be, but the feeling pulling her forward was getting harder to ignore. The following days moved like quiet ripples on a still pond. Zora found herself slipping into the rhythm of the Walker estate, though nothing about it felt familiar. Every room was too large, every hallway too silent. Yet William's presence made it bearable. They spent mornings in the conservatory, afternoons walking the garden paths, and evenings with him sharing old stories, sipping tea like old friends. Yet, behind the quiet charm of those hours, the tension simmered. It came mostly from Penelope. The matriarch never said anything overtly cruel, but Zora could feel the quiet disapproval in every glance, every perfectly measured word. It was like Penelope spoke two languages, one with her mouth, the other with her eyes, and both made Zora feel smaller than the estate's towering oaks. "Would you like me to press the linens for you, Miss Simmons?" Penelope asked one afternoon as they crossed paths near the staircase. Zora blinked. "Mom." Penelope gave a tight smile. "You seem so fond of domestic work. I assumed you might enjoy assisting the staff." Zora held her composure. "I'm here for William." Penelope's gaze flicked up and down, clearly unimpressed. "Of course you are." Before Zora could respond, Samuel entered the hallway, glancing between them. His eyes caught the stiffness in Zora's posture instantly. "Is everything all right?" Penelope's expression softened like nothing had happened. "Perfectly." Samuel's brow furrowed slightly, but he said nothing more. Later that evening, as Zora and William sat by the fireplace, the old man chuckled softly. "You're handling my wife better than most would." Zora smiled faintly, stirring the tea in her cup. "I'm trying. She's not bad, just protective of her world. And her son." William's voice softened. "And maybe, in her own way, of you." Zora frowned. "I'm not sure it feels like protection." William leaned back, watching the fire dance. "Sometimes we build fences so high, we forget we built them to keep ourselves safe, not to shut others out." The words lingered with Zora as she retired for the night. The next morning, when Zora arrived at the diner for a quick visit to check on Ruby and Betty Ann, she found the air thick with whispers. Pearl waved her over to the corner booth. "Child, you best sit down," Pearl warned. "What's wrong?" Zora asked, sliding into the seat. Pearl leaned in. "Janice's cousin works over at Walker Development. Word is Samuel's been seen around town asking questions. Not about property, about you." Zora's heart skipped. "Me?" Betty Ann joined them, eyes wide. "Folks are talking. They think you're, well, getting close to him." Zora's cheeks burned. "That's not, I'm just helping William." Pearl raised a brow. "Doesn't matter what it is. It's what folks think it is." Across the room, Janice was watching. Lips curved into a thin smirk. She sauntered over, resting an elbow on the booth. "Heard you've been spending time at the big house. Must be nice having the Walker name open doors for you." Zora stiffened. "It's not like that." Janice shrugged. "Maybe not yet." Before Zora could fire back, Ruby called from the kitchen. "Zora, I need you." Zora excused herself, thankful for the escape, but as she pushed through the swinging door, Ruby pulled her aside. "You know I love you," Ruby said softly. "But be careful. A heart like yours, it's gold. Folks like Penelope, like Janice, they see it and they'll either want to tarnish it or take it." Zora blinked back the sting in her eyes. "I don't want anything from them." Ruby smiled sadly. "That's exactly why you're worth worrying about." Later that afternoon, back at the estate, Zora found herself in the garden, clipping wildflowers with William. He noticed her silence quickly. "You're carrying something heavy," William said, adjusting his old gardening hat. Zora exhaled. "It's just people talk. They always will." William chuckled. "But it's what you do, not what they say, that tells your story." Before Zora could reply, Samuel approached, sleeves rolled, tie loosened, different from the polished man who first walked into the diner. "Mind if I steal Miss Simmons for a moment?" Samuel asked. William waved him off with a grin. "Only if you return her." Samuel motioned for Zora to follow him to the stone path beneath the oaks. "I heard what happened at the diner," Samuel said calmly. Zora's chest tightened. "It's nothing." Samuel stopped, turning to her. "It's not nothing if it bothers you." Zora avoided his gaze. "I'm fine." He stepped closer. "Zora, you don't have to keep pretending you're fine. Not with me." The use of her name, not Miss Simmons, caught her off guard. There was something different in his voice, gentle, unpracticed. "I'm used to people assuming the worst," Zora admitted quietly. Samuel's voice lowered. "So am I." Their eyes met beneath the soft sway of moss-covered branches, the weight of unspoken words thick between them. The silence felt like a conversation of its own. "Why do you care?" Zora finally asked, voice trembling slightly. "About me? About this?" Samuel hesitated. His usual control wavered. "I don't know yet," he confessed, voice low. "But I do." Zora's breath caught, unsure if it was the words or the way he said them that shook her more. From the far end of the garden, Penelope stood at the edge of the veranda, watching. Unnoticed, but not uninvolved, and just like that, the distance between Zora and Samuel felt dangerously close. A soft drizzle blanketed the Walker estate the following morning, casting a silver sheen over the garden. Zora stood at the window of the conservatory, watching raindrops trace slow patterns down the glass. Inside, the fire crackled quietly, but no warmth seemed to reach the chill sitting in her chest. Samuel had barely spoken to her since their conversation in the garden. The closeness, the honesty in his voice, still lingered in her mind like a melody she couldn't quite forget. Yet, today, Samuel seemed distant again, hidden behind the armor of his work and family obligations. William noticed, of course. He always did. As Zora read aloud from one of his old books, he cut her off gently. "Child, you're reading like you're a million miles away." Zora set the book down with a small sigh. "I suppose I am." William smiled knowingly. The heart tends to wander when it's uncertain. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You've stirred something here. Don't think I haven't seen it." Zora's brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" Before William could answer, the door swung open and Penelope entered, composed as always, carrying a folded letter. "Zora," she said, eyes sharp, "would you join me for a moment?" Zora stood carefully, exchanging a glance with William, whose jaw tightened slightly as if bracing for a storm. In the grand sitting room, Penelope offered no seat. She stood by the window, holding the letter like a delicate weapon. "Miss Simmons," Penelope began, her tone smooth but laced with something cold. "I wanted to speak plainly, as I believe you deserve that much." Zora's stomach knotted. "Of course." Penelope's gaze lingered on the gardens beyond the window. "You may think your presence here is harmless, but I assure you, this family has survived far worse storms than well-meaning waitress." Zora swallowed hard, but kept her voice steady. "I'm only here to help William." Penelope's eyes flicked toward her. "Are you? Or is it Samuel you're hoping to help now?" Zora's breath caught. "I'm not." "You've spent enough time with men to know how they behave when they're intrigued," Penelope cut in. "And Samuel is intrigued." Zora's voice shook slightly. "With all due respect, I didn't ask for his attention." Penelope tilted her head, considering her. "That may be true, but attention from the wrong person, even when uninvited, can ruin a girl like you." Her words were sharp but quiet. "I've seen it before. Ambition, kindness, or both. It all ends the same." Zora clenched her hands together. "I'm not trying to ruin anything." Penelope's expression softened slightly, almost sad. "Miss Simmons, this is not your world." A heavy silence filled the room. Zora wanted to speak, to defend herself, but part of her knew Penelope wasn't entirely wrong. And yet, something inside her refused to shrink. "I won't apologize for being kind," Zora said finally, "or for caring." For a split second, Penelope blinked, as if caught off guard. Then, without another word, she turned and left the room, leaving Zora standing alone. Later that day, as the rain thickened, Zora found herself walking through the garden paths, her coat pulled tightly around her. She needed air. She needed space. Every step on the gravel echoed the words Penelope had spoken. "You don't belong here. You always walk like you're carrying the weight of the whole city," Samuel's voice called from behind her. Zora turned to find him standing near the hedgerow, hands deep in his pockets. The rain beaded on his coat, but he didn't seem to notice. "I guess I am," Zora said, voice quieter than she intended. Samuel stepped closer. "Did my mother say something?" Zora hesitated. "She's worried. I don't blame her." Samuel sighed heavily. "She sees threats everywhere. It's not you." Zora bit the inside of her cheek. "Is it, though? Maybe she's right. I don't fit here. I'm just a waitress." Samuel's brow furrowed, eyes locked on hers. "Don't say that." Zora blinked. "You're not just anything." His voice softened. "You see people, Zora. That's rare, especially in this family." The rain thickened, dripping from the trees, but neither of them moved. Samuel stepped forward, close enough that Zora could feel the heat of his breath in the cool air. "I shouldn't," he whispered. Zora's heart raced. "Shouldn't what?" Samuel's eyes flickered, uncertain. "I shouldn't be drawn to you like this." Zora felt the pull too. Undeniable, terrifying. Before either could speak again, footsteps echoed from the veranda. Penelope stood beneath the shelter of the columned porch, watching them. Samuel stiffened immediately, stepping back. The unspoken moment shattered. Samuel's voice returned to its measured calm. "I should go." Zora nodded slowly, eyes downcast. "Of course." Without another word, Samuel turned and walked away, leaving Zora standing beneath the dripping oaks, heart pounding and throat tight. The sky above darkened, but it wasn't just the weather. And inside, behind the grand windows of the estate, Penelope's shadow loomed. The sky remained heavy with clouds the next morning, as if the estate itself sensed what was about to unfold. Zora stood by the window in the conservatory, watching the garden, waiting for the sun to cut through the grey. But it never came. Even William, usually cheery with a story or gentle joke, sat unusually quiet in his armchair, staring out into nothing. Zora tried to read aloud, but her voice lacked conviction. She finally gave up, lowering the book. "William, you're quiet today." He shifted, running a hand across his weathered face. "You feel it too, don't you?" he murmured. "Something's changed." Zora swallowed. "I don't know what I feel." Before William could reply, Thomas appeared at the doorway, looking more formal than usual. "Miss Simmons, you're wanted in the drawing room." Zora's pulse quickened. She stood and glanced toward William, who only nodded solemnly. "Go on, child." As she entered the drawing room, Zora found Penelope, Samuel, and, to her surprise, Janice. Dressed in her best Sunday outfit, Janice stood near the fireplace, chin high, eyes glinting. Zora's breath caught. "Janice?" Janice turned, feigning surprise. "Oh, Zora, I didn't realize you'd be here today." Penelope gestured to a chair, her expression unreadable. "Please sit." Zora remained standing, every instinct screaming that something wasn't right. Samuel avoided her eyes. Penelope's voice was smooth. "We received information this morning." Janice came forward, concerned, as any loyal citizen would be. She glanced at Samuel. "About your intentions." Zora's stomach dropped. "My intentions?" Janice stepped forward, fingers laced sweetly. "I only told them what I heard around the diner. Folks say you've been..." eager to find your way into the Walk of Fortune. Zora's mouth went dry. That's not true. Janice widened her eyes, all innocent. Oh, honey, I'm just repeating what folks have been whispering. I'm only trying to protect you. Samuel finally spoke, voice tense. Zora, you didn't mention that you'd been discussing this with others. Zora stared at him, hurt blooming in her chest. Because I haven't. I haven't said a word to anyone about this family. Penelope folded her arms. Yet the town seems to know plenty. Either they're all mistaken, or someone's been speaking when they shouldn't. Zora's voice trembled. Why would I ever? Penelope interrupted sharply. Because ambition is a powerful motivator, Miss Simmons. Samuel flinched slightly at his mother's tone, but said nothing. Zora turned toward him, voice cracking. Samuel, you know me. You know that's not why I'm here. Samuel hesitated, eyes dark with conflict. I thought I did. Zora took a step back. You thought. The room swirled around her. Janice's false concern, Penelope's cold certainty, and Samuel's silence folded in on her like a wave. She clenched her fists. Is this what you think of me? That I'm after your money? That I've just been playing some part this whole time? Samuel's jaw worked, but no words came. The ache inside Zora was sharper than she could bear. I should have known. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Kindness never gets you anything but heartache. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall here, not in this room. Without another word, she turned and walked out, past Thomas, who gave her a soft, helpless look, past William's concerned gaze as she passed the conservatory, past the towering doors of the estate, out into the cold drizzle. The path back to town blurred behind her tears. The garden that once felt like a place of possibility now felt like a trap she had only just escaped. By the time she reached the diner that evening, soaked and shivering, the weight of humiliation sat heavy on her chest. Ruby and Betty Ann rushed to her. Zora, what on earth? I'm fine, Zora whispered, brushing past them. Pearl stood near the register, watching Zora with calm, steady eyes. You came back. Zora gave a shaky nod. It's where I belong. Pearl stepped closer. Child, you don't have to let their words be the truth. Zora shook her head. I should have known better. I don't belong in their world. Betty Ann whispered. Zora, what happened? Zora couldn't speak. Not yet. She only knew one thing for sure. Whatever she felt growing between her and Samuel, whatever fragile hope had started to form, had just been shattered. And somewhere deep inside the grand halls of the Walker estate, Samuel stood alone in the drawing room, staring at the chair where Zora had stood moments ago. His mother's words echoed, but so did the hurt in Zora's eyes. He rubbed his thumb against the edge of his sleeve, suddenly unsure if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. Rain clung stubbornly to the streets of Charleston, as if the sky itself shared Zora's sorrow. The city, usually humming with quiet charm, now felt like a stranger. Zora stood behind the counter at Magnolia Diner, staring blankly at the door, unable to find the will to move. The place smelled of fresh cornbread and cinnamon, but nothing seemed to reach her senses. It all felt muted, distant, like she was underwater. Ruby wiped her hands on her apron, watching Zora from the kitchen pass through. You ain't touched your coffee, she said softly. Zora didn't respond. Betty Ann slid into the seat next to her. Zora, you've been staring at that door for an hour. Say something, please. Zora finally exhaled. I let them make me believe I was someone I'm not, that I don't belong. Pearl, seated nearby, folded her arms. Child, you belong anywhere you stand. Don't you let anyone tell you different. Zora's eyes welled, but she forced the tears down. She shook her head. It's not just Penelope. Samuel. He stood there, said nothing. He believed them. Pearl leaned in. Sometimes, the hardest thing for folks with too much pride is seeing the truth when it's right in front of them. Zora pressed her trembling hands to the counter. It still hurts. Pearl gave a gentle nod. It's supposed to. Means your heart's still good. The bell above the diner door jingled. For a fleeting second, Zora's heart leaped, expecting Samuel. But it was only Thomas standing awkwardly in the doorway, hat in hand, rain dripping from his coat. The diner quieted. Thomas approached the counter, looking around at the watchful eyes of the regulars. "Miss Simmons," he said softly, "Mr. Walker asked me to deliver this." He handed her a simple envelope. No seal, no fancy stationery. Zora hesitated, fingers grazing the edge of the paper, before slowly opening it. Inside was a letter, handwritten. "Zora, I am sorry. I let silence speak for me, and in doing so, I hurt you. I believed doubt because I was afraid of what I felt, and afraid of what others would say. That fear was mine, not yours to carry. Please, don't let my failure diminish who you are. Samuel." Zora stared at the words, her heart pounding against her ribs. The room around her blurred as the letter trembled in her hands. Betty Ann whispered, "Is it from him?" Zora nodded faintly. Thomas stood patiently, eyes soft. "He asked me to deliver one more thing." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch, placing it gently on the counter. Inside was a brooch, delicate, shaped like a magnolia flower, crafted with care and age. Zora recognized it instantly. It had belonged to William. She had seen him wear it pinned to his coat lapel on quiet mornings. "He wanted you to have this," Thomas said. Pearl gasped softly. "That's a Walker family heirloom?" Zora's throat tightened. "Why would he—" Thomas cleared his throat. "Because William wanted you to have it. He told Samuel, and me, that it belongs with someone who understands its meaning." Tears slipped silently down Zora's cheeks. She held the brooch delicately in her palms, unable to speak. Thomas adjusted his hat. "He also asked me to tell you, if you won't come for him, come for William." The room stood still. Even Janice, who had been eavesdropping near the kitchen door, said nothing. Zora's mind flooded with memories. William's stories, his quiet laughter, the garden walks, the way he always made her feel seen. And Samuel, the way he looked at her beneath the oaks. The softness in his voice when he said, "I shouldn't be drawn to you like this." Yet he was, and so was she. Ruby wiped at her eyes. "You gonna go, honey?" Zora looked around the diner. These were her people. They always would be. But there was something waiting beyond the fog and rain. Something unfinished. Zora nodded slowly. "I need to." Betty Ann squeezed her hand. "Then go." Within the hour, Zora stood again at the iron gates of the Walker estate. The rain had softened to a mist, coating the garden like a memory. She stared at the familiar path leading up to the grand doors, clutching the magnolia brooch tightly. The doors opened before she even knocked. It was Samuel. He stood there. No suit today, just a simple sweater and rolled sleeves. His eyes were red-rimmed, tired, but when they met hers, they softened instantly. Neither of them spoke for a long breath. Finally, Samuel whispered, "You came." Zora swallowed hard. "I'm not sure why yet." Samuel stepped aside, allowing her in. "Then let me give you a reason to stay." Zora hesitated, but stepped inside. The familiar scent of lilies and oak welcomed her. They walked to the conservatory in silence. There, William sat in his chair, thinner, paler than before. But when he saw Zora, his eyes lit up. "Ah," he breathed, smiling weakly. "There you are." Zora rushed to him, kneeling by his side. William chuckled softly. "You didn't think I'd let you leave without a proper goodbye, did you?" Tears blurred Zora's vision. "I shouldn't have left." You didn't, William whispered. You just got lost for a moment. He took her hand, fingers trembling. This family, it needs you more than you know. Samuel, he needs you. Zora glanced up at Samuel, who stood quietly behind her, eyes shining. The walls between them crumbled in that fragile silence. William squeezed her hand gently. Promise me you won't let fear steal the good that's waiting for you. Zora pressed her forehead against William's knuckles, tears falling freely. I promise. The room settled into a peaceful stillness. William closed his eyes, resting back into the chair with the faintest smile. Zora stood slowly, turning to Samuel. Neither spoke. The words weren't ready yet, but the ache, the apology, the longing, it was all there. Samuel stepped forward, voice breaking softly. I'm sorry, Zora. Zora's lips trembled. I know. They stood inches apart, the weight of the past days hanging between them, but for the first time there was no pretense, only truth. And outside the garden swayed gently beneath the soft mist, waiting, just like them. The estate carried an unfamiliar quiet the next morning, not the kind that made Zora uneasy, but the kind that asked her to listen. Every creak of the floorboards, every soft chirp from the garden, every sigh of the wind against the window panes felt like part of a conversation only she could hear. William's words from the night before repeated in her mind. Promise me you won't let fear steal the good that's waiting for you. She found herself sitting in the conservatory once again, this time beside Samuel. Neither of them spoke at first. They simply sat there, watching the rain soften the outlines of the trees beyond the glass. Samuel broke the silence, voice fragile. He asked me last night if I saw you, or if I only saw what you weren't. Zora turned her head slowly. His gaze stayed fixed on the glass. And I couldn't answer him. His fingers fidgeted with the cuff of his sleeve. Because I've spent so long trying to see people for what they can offer, what they might cost me, what they might take, I forgot how to just see them. Zora's throat tightened, but she remained quiet. Samuel's voice cracked. But when you left, I saw you. Her breath caught. Samuel faced her fully now, eyes glistening. Not as someone trying to take something, not as someone beneath us, just you. He blinked hard, and I hated myself for not seeing it sooner. Zora's chest swelled painfully. She fought the tears threatening to break free. Why tell me now? Because I'm tired of living behind walls I didn't even build. Samuel's voice softened to nearly a whisper. And because you're the first person I've wanted to let in. The words hovered between them, trembling in the air. Zora could hardly breathe. Part of her wanted to trust him. Another part ached, remembering the silence when she needed him most. I'm scared, she admitted, voice shaking. I'm scared that I'll never be enough. For this world, for your family. Samuel's voice steadied. You were enough the moment you offered my father a cup of coffee and treated him like a man, not a burden. He leaned forward. That's the world I want to live in, not the one I've been trapped in. Before she could answer, Thomas appeared quietly at the doorway. Forgive me, he said gently, but Mrs. Walker requests your presence in the drawing room. Zora stiffened. Samuel stood. I'll come too. Thomas shook his head. She asked for Miss Simmons alone. Zora glanced at Samuel, who hesitated, but finally nodded. I'll be right here. With a deep breath, Zora followed Thomas down the long hallway. Every step echoed like a drumbeat, each one pulling her closer to the room she had once left humiliated. Penelope stood by the window when Zora entered, as poised as ever, fingers laced in front of her. She didn't turn when Zora stepped inside. You've returned, Penelope said, her voice as calm as ever. Zora steadied herself. William asked me to. Penelope let out a slow breath, as if weighing every word carefully. William is a sentimental man, too sentimental for his own good sometimes. Zora kept her gaze steady. And you? Penelope finally turned, eyes sharp yet unreadable. I am a woman who has spent her life keeping this family together, protecting it. She took a step closer. I have seen many come and go, thinking they could slip into this world, reshaping it, or worse, breaking it. Zora's voice quivered slightly. I don't want to break anything. No, Penelope said softly. You just want to belong. The room thickened with quiet. Zora swallowed hard. Is that so wrong? Penelope's posture softened by the smallest degree. It isn't. She paced slowly, fingers trailing the edge of the mantel. I've watched you, Miss Simmons. The way you care for William. The way you look at Samuel. Zora's pulse raced. And, Penelope added, eyes locking onto Zora's, the way he looks at you. A flicker of emotion passed through Penelope's usually composed expression. Was it regret? I have fought so hard to keep this family standing, Penelope whispered. But perhaps I forgot that standing isn't the same as living. Her voice faltered for the first time. Samuel's father, William, taught me that once, long before I buried myself in expectations. Zora said nothing, too stunned to interrupt. Penelope's shoulders sagged, a rare vulnerability slipping through. You've changed him. She swallowed, and I fear you've changed me too. Tears welled unexpectedly in Zora's eyes. Penelope stepped forward. But make no mistake, the world will not make this easy for you. She reached out and gently touched the magnolia brooch pinned to Zora's dress. But if you are to wear this, wear it knowing who you are. Zora's lips trembled. I do. Penelope stepped back and, for the first time, offered something closer to a real smile. Not perfect, not polished, but honest. Then I won't stand in your way. The words hit like a bell ringing through Zora's soul. Penelope gestured to the door. Samuel's waiting. Zora stepped into the hall, dazed, trying to process what had just happened. Samuel stood by the conservatory entrance, pacing nervously. When he saw her, he straightened. What happened? Zora blinked back tears. I think she just gave me her blessing. Samuel stared, stunned. She did. Zora nodded, wiping her eyes. I think so. Samuel let out a shaky breath. I've never heard her do that for anyone. Zora couldn't help but laugh softly through her tears. Me neither. Without hesitation, Samuel closed the space between them, taking her hands in his. His thumb brushed across the back of her hand, slow and deliberate. I meant what I said, he whispered. I want you here. With us. With me. Zora's heart swelled, but before she could answer, a soft knock interrupted them. It was Thomas. Forgive me, he said gently. William is asking for both of you. The urgency in his voice, the way his eyes flickered with concern, made Zora and Samuel share a worried glance before quickly making their way down the hall. In that moment, neither of them knew what awaited. But they knew it mattered. And as they entered the room, William sat waiting, smiling softly, as if he knew all along they'd return together. William sat by the window, his favorite seat in the conservatory, with the winter light catching the soft silver in his hair. The garden beyond, though bare from the season, still held its quiet beauty. Zora and Samuel entered without speaking, instinctively knowing this moment was different from all the others. William's eyes lifted, and when they settled on Zora, they softened. There you are, he whispered, as though he had been waiting for her all morning. His gaze flicked to Samuel. And you. Samuel crossed the room quickly, kneeling by his father's side. Are you all right? William chuckled weakly. Don't go acting like I'm on my way out just yet. I've still got breath left. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for Zora. She stepped closer, letting him hold her hand. For a long, silent moment, The three simply existed together. No titles, no expectations, just them. William's voice broke the stillness. I've watched you both dance around what's been plain as day. His thumb brushed across Zora's hand. Son, I've seen you run from many things, but never from your duty. Yet, when it comes to her, you've been running like the devil's been on your heels. Samuel lowered his head, guilt flashing across his face. William turned to Zora. And you, child, you've been so busy worrying about where you don't belong, you haven't realized you're already home. Zora's throat tightened. William, He squeezed her hand gently. Let me finish. He shifted slightly, clearly gathering what strength he had. I left this family once. Thought I didn't fit. Thought money and tradition were chains. Maybe they were. But I also left behind a wife who needed me. A son who didn't understand why. His voice wavered but held. I spent too many years watching from a distance. Don't make the mistake I did. Don't let fear or pride steal what's right in front of you. Zora blinked back tears, her heart heavy with emotion. Samuel reached across, placing his hand over Zora's and William's, binding them together. I don't want to lose you, Samuel said softly, voice trembling. Either of you. William smiled faintly. Then don't. The door creaked gently, and Penelope stood at the edge of the room. She didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. Her eyes glistened, and for the first time, she looked not like the Walker matriarch, but like a wife, a mother, a woman who understood the weight of choices. Zora turned to Samuel, tears streaming freely now. I don't know if I can fit in this world. Samuel gently wiped a tear from her cheek. I don't want you to fit in it. His voice cracked. I want us to build one together. The air thickened with emotion. William leaned back, satisfied, peaceful. Good, he whispered, closing his eyes briefly. That's all I wanted. Silence wrapped around them like a warm quilt, not uncomfortable, but full of understanding. Penelope, quiet but purposeful, walked to William's side and knelt, taking his hand. No words passed between them, but in their intertwined fingers, forgiveness was already spoken. Samuel turned to Zora. Whatever comes next, we do it together. Not because of my family, not because of the name, but because I care for you. He took a deep breath, more than I've let myself admit. Zora searched his eyes. All the fear, pride, and pretense from before were gone. What remained was something simple, but powerful. So, without waiting for permission, without fear of who might be watching, Zora stepped closer and leaned into Samuel's arms. His embrace was immediate, protective, and real. The storm that had raged quietly between them broke, not with thunder, but with the quiet settling of two people choosing each other. In the corner, Pearl stood quietly, having slipped in unnoticed. She wiped a tear with her handkerchief, whispering under her breath, "About time." The rain outside softened into a mist, as if the whole city of Charleston had been holding its breath and was now finally allowed to exhale. And inside the old walls of the Walker estate, something that had been broken for years quietly began to mend. Spring arrived in Charleston with the soft rustling of magnolia blooms and the warm scent of gardenias drifting through the air. The Walker estate, usually stoic and still, now breathed with life. Fresh flowers dressed the garden paths, and sunlight poured through the high windows like a quiet blessing. Today, the house didn't feel like a monument to old money. It felt like a home. Zora stood before the mirror in the guest room that had slowly become hers. She adjusted the magnolia brooch on her dress, running her fingers across its delicate petals. It wasn't just an heirloom now. It was part of her story. There was a knock. Samuel peeked his head through the door. "They're ready," he said with a nervous smile. His eyes softened when he saw her. "You look Like yourself. Zora's lips quivered into a shy smile. I hope that's enough. Samuel stepped inside, shaking his head. It's everything. He reached for her hand, holding it gently. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, as if grounding himself in the reality of this moment. You ready? Zora exhaled. As I'll ever be. Together they stepped into the garden where a small gathering waited. Not the grand affair one might expect from the Walker name, but something quiet, meaningful, and full of heart. Pearl sat near the front, dabbing at her eyes already. Betty Ann stood beside her, holding Ruby's hand as they beamed with pride. Even Janice, surprisingly subdued, lingered respectfully near the back, as if realizing perhaps for the first time that this wasn't just some small-town fantasy playing out. This was real. Penelope stood beside William's chair. The old man, though thinner and weaker, held himself with pride. The gentle breeze toyed with his hat as he smiled, watching Zora and Samuel approach. Samuel squeezed Zora's hand as they stopped before William. You okay? He whispered. I'm more than okay, Zora said, though her eyes shimmered. William lifted his hand, motioning for them to come closer. His voice was soft but steady. When I first walked into that diner, I wasn't looking for a cup of coffee. I was looking for a reminder that kindness still lives, even when you ain't got much left to give. He looked at Zora, eyes full of pride. You gave me that. Zora bit her lip, tears slipping free. And you, William turned to Samuel, have always had everything, except the courage to follow your heart. Samuel's throat tightened. He nodded. William's gaze softened. Today, you both prove that it don't matter what you're born into or what you lack. What matters is what you give. He held out his hand to them. Now, if you'll allow me the honor, I'd like to bless this union. A hush fell over the garden. Even the wind seemed to pause. Zora and Samuel clasped each other's hands tightly, as William, with frail but steady words, spoke of love, forgiveness, and the courage to choose kindness, even when it hurts. When William finished, Samuel turned to Zora. I've been blind to what matters for too long, he said, but I see you now, the real you, and I don't want to look away again. Zora's voice trembled as she whispered, Then don't. Samuel leaned in, resting his forehead gently against hers, before finally, in front of friends, family, and the garden that had witnessed their beginning, they sealed it with a kiss. Not rushed, not grand, but real. The small gathering erupted into soft applause and a few quiet cheers. Pearl sniffled. Lord have mercy, that's love if I ever saw it. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden light through the magnolia trees, Zora noticed Penelope quietly watching from the side. Their eyes met. For the first time, there was no distance, no judgment, only understanding. Penelope stepped forward and, with the grace only she could carry, gently fixed Zora's brooch. It suits you, she whispered. Thank you for staying. Zora blinked back tears. Thank you for letting me. William watched them with a knowing smile. The fractures in the family were mending, not overnight, but one quiet, tender moment at a time. Later, under the soft glow of lanterns strung between the oaks, the celebration became less about a name or a fortune and more about the people. Zora danced barefoot with Betty Ann. Ruby laughed so hard she nearly spilled her tea. Samuel held Zora's hand like he was afraid to let go. At the edge of the garden, William sat quietly, soaking it all in. He nodded to himself, satisfied, and whispered, That's the way. The night carried on with music, laughter, and stories shared beneath the magnolias. And as the stars blinked softly overhead, Zora realized she hadn't found a new world to belong to. She had simply helped make this one a little kinder, a little softer, and finally, a little more like home.